Thank you, Renee, for the slides. Well, welcome to this, our second Purview AMA. And thank you very much for joining and sending us all of these questions. Looking forward to see what we have in the Q&A as well. Wanted a quick, brief overview of Purview. It is many solutions under three major umbrellas, and we have a panel of experts in both that's going to be speaking today, as well as in chat to help answer all of the questions we have. But we've been on the journey for the past about 2-3 years now on providing a single Purview story across all of your data estate, whether that's M365 and beyond M365. And as part of this, we'll be splitting the questions in those three primary categories of solutions between data security, data governance, and data compliance. For any deeper questions and information about these products and learning more about them, please feel free to add them in chat, as well as reaching out through the community. Renee, any other intro you wanted to add before we jump in questions?
Thanks for me. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll jump, and please feel free to enter questions in Q&A. We'll be monitoring those, but we'll start with a couple of the pre-submitted questions that we've received in no particular order. So we have this first one for data security, where it is about how does the policy flow work in Microsoft DLP Purview, and how do exceptions work? And if we could please go to the next slide, I've added a quick graphic to help explain this. And thank you. So the policy flow in this diagram will be published very soon publicly on Learn. Think of it as from the flow policy standpoint, the first part is all about synchronization. What's great about Purview, it provides you one place to define your DLP policies. As part of that sync process, think of it as it's going into the cloud engine or policy sync engine. And what that will provide is then a distribution across all of the workloads that we support, whether that's from an Exchange, SharePoint and OneDrive, Teams DLP, third-party, SaaS application with MDCA, and devices. And you can see sort of the timing or SLAs that we have across the timing that it would take for each of these. So think of it as when you create a policy, it goes in the cloud, and then for devices, there's a sync that happens to the device every 5 minutes or so. What's important to see here is from the second part of the question, which was about how do exception work. That's a bit of a it depends questions on the workload. So maybe just a quick overview. There's two concepts that I tend to talk about for exceptions: the policy tips versus the actual block, which happens. So if I think of policy tips in Outlook, there's going to be the flow will be live, where you can, through the clients, you will get a notification when the policy is hit or the rule is matched, and then the user will be prevented from sending the email, for example. We have features that are in the public roadmap about waiting on send that will further enhance that experience. But think of it as that first part of the flow and exception is policy tips. The second part will be from the system. So should an email do go out, if there's no policy tips, then it's part of their transport rules. And then for each workload, there's some nuances. If I think of Teams DLP, for example, that will be a near real-time operation where the IM is verified and then sort of removed from both the sender and recipient. And then for SharePoint, it's done at every time that the file is touched, I would say. So anytime the file is updated, because think of SharePoint as, because it is a collaboration platform, the triggers are slightly different. It's not necessarily when you share. It could be that the file was already shared and becomes sensitive. So there's a bunch of nuances to go here, but happy to, if there's follow-up questions on the more specifics about the exception flow, please feel free to share. Thank you. Renee? Could be for the next question, please.
Yeah, it looks like we have some live questions coming in. So let's take our question from Connor. So Connor's question is there a way in the File Explorer to tell if a document has been encrypted with a sensitivity label? The sensitivity column in the File Explorer shows blank for all files.
I don't believe there is a way. We used to with integration on the device with the add-in. I don't believe we still have that for the moment today. We do in SharePoint and OneDrive for sure, but not from a file explorer.
Thank you. So I think we'll just go to our next slide question, and then we'll come back to live. So this is another pre-submitted question, a compliance question. Does Microsoft still provide regulatory templates based on compliance frameworks like CIS? And here we have Peter.
Hey guys, thanks for the great question. I read through the notes on the question, and it seemed like this individual works for CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security. And I think based on that, the key question here is whether CIS should promote Microsoft Purview regulatory templates. And I would say yes, with certain limitations. While Purview's Compliance Manager includes pre-built regulatory templates, right, including CIS benchmarks and assessments, CIS itself, and correct me if I'm wrong, is not a regulatory body itself, right? Instead, it provides security best practices and frameworks around compliance to customers. So, absolutely use Purview's Compliance Manager. This includes CIS benchmarks assessments, which can help organizations further measure compliance. CIS also typically promotes its own security standards rather than specific compliance tooling. So the best approach here would be, instead of promoting the specific regulatory templates, CIS should perhaps promote adherence to CIS benchmarks and controls, and mention that Microsoft Purview and Microsoft 365 inside of Microsoft 365 can help organizations assess and implement these standards, right? And in terms of promotion, we can expand a little bit to say, if CIS is looking to promote compliance and security within M365 environments, then a stark focus should be placed on best practices and tooling that align with CIS benchmarks and CIS controls. You can think about CIS Microsoft 365 benchmarks, which help organizations secure their M365 environment and specific security settings. This covers Azure AD, which is now known as Entra ID, Defender XDR, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, and so on. CIS can promote this benchmark directly rather than the Purview templates that we'll be speaking about. Another big one would be CIS's critical security controls and Microsoft's 365 security tooling. So for identity and access management, that's a big one. Promote the Entra ID security defaults, conditional access, MFA. For data protection and governance, promote Purview, IP, so information protection. You have your sensitivity labeling, data leakage prevention, insider risk management, and communication compliance. For security monitoring and auditing, you would promote Purview auditing, Defender XDR and Sentinel. And in collaboration with Microsoft Compliance Manager, you could then obviously say, inside of this, here are some of the regulatory templates that CIS can recommend Microsoft Compliance Manager to do as a supporting tool to help organizations track security posture against CIS benchmarks. So again, really summarizing that, CIS should position this in the way that CIS promotes its own benchmarks and controls first. Should mention that Microsoft Purview and Compliance Manager specifically in this field can help organizations align with CIS standards. And maybe instead of directly pushing the regulatory template, CIS should promote secure configurations, risk management best practices, and M365 security tooling to help achieve these goals. If you need a little bit more, maybe an alignment guide or something, reach out to us and we'll be happy to share those. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Peter. And to our speakers, Kevin, Maxime, Peter, and eventually Sandeep, we have many questions coming in the live Q&A. Feel free when you're not speaking to reply directly to those questions if you'd like, because I don't think we'll get to all of them within our time here. So feel free to kind of look through and see what your areas are and take some questions. We'll try to do another live one right now. And I think, Maxime, do you see one that you'd like to answer live? I think there's a next one was, how does a DLP policy? Can you take that one?
Sure. Which one exactly? I've been answering in chat.
Fran,
So.
sorry. Oh, how does DLP policy calculate? Maybe
The number of hits on specifics. Yeah. All right. So let me repeat the questions. How does policy calculates the number of hits on a specific set? We see limits not being correctly detected in some use cases. So at the base of it, so classification, just for clarity, it's always when the file is touched. So if I think of a SharePoint workload, that's when the file is updated. We always rescan. Think of it as the SharePoint indexing is leveraged here and communicates with our data classification service. For emails, it's when the email is sent. And then for files on endpoint, that's when the file is, well, technically when the file handle is open, that we classify and look at we store in extended attributes the result. Now, how it's calculated will be, I believe the limit that we calculate is 250, if I remember correctly, where we, so first of all, it's the text extraction piece. We take the content, we look at the method to extract based on the file type. We will extract up to 2 megabytes of contents or 2 million characters that we extract, and from that we will calculate the sits, but we stop counting at, and I believe it's 250, that we stop counting the numbers of sits, which meets all the regulatory requirements on across well, all the worldwide ones that we have. And then the reason for stopping this is any enforcement needs to happen below. So for performance reasons, we stop counting above that 250 limits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just noticed that you were replying in chat, so my apologies. Okay, so our next preceded question is a governance question. So I believe we have Kevin on the line for this area. And somebody asked about Purview data governance pricing. So if you could give a high-level overview, that would be so very helpful for those interested. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Renee. This is a very, very common ask that we get from lots of different customers. The good news is that pricing in the new Purview data governance is extremely less complicated than it was during the Azure Purview days. Just as kind of a brief overview, in the Azure Purview days, you had to pay for scanning and your data map and the activity and all of those things. And the minimum that you would end up paying is like $300 something a month, no matter whether you were getting any value out of it or not. That's no longer the case in the new Microsoft Purview data governance. Now, everything that you use, you can get everything you pay for, you should get business value out of. So there are 3 different areas where that will cause the meters to spin, that will cost money. The first one being unique governed assets. So an asset is a unique governed asset if it is attached to any data product or it has a column that is part of a critical data element. So that's pretty much the main ways that those become governed assets, and it only will be counted once. So essentially, if you have a governed asset that is attached to one data product, if it is attached to another data product, you will not be charged twice. Or if it has a column attached to a critical data element, you'll only be charged once per asset that is attached to a business construct. The other 2 areas that will, accrue a cost are the data state health controls. Those controls are used to create actions as well as to build reports and things of that nature. There's 10 of them that are enabled by default, so that is a cost that immediately is running as soon as you have that up there. The difference between the Azure Purview, where you had to pay for the data map no matter what, and the health controls is that the health controls can be turned off. If you are not getting business value from the health controls that are there, you can selectively disable them or completely disable them, and you won't have to pay anything at all. Obviously we don't recommend that. The health controls are very important and useful. But if you are not feeling like you're getting business value, you have the option to disable them. The third and final area that can cause the meters to spin is the data quality rules. So whenever you set up a data quality scan and define the rules within that area, for the amount of time that those data quality scans are running, you'll be charged for the data governance processing units based upon the type of rule. Now, those rules can vary depending upon how complex they are, what data sources they are, how large the data sources they are. But in general, it goes back to that same value-based approach. If you're not getting value out of a data quality rule, turn it off. And you can turn it off without deleting it. So 100% everything that you pay for in the new Purview data governance is based around business value and transparency. So you always have control of every dime you spend. And if you're not getting business value out of something that you're spending money on, stop spending money on it. Turn it off. And I think that pretty much answers this question.
Thanks, Kevin. And I see a little follow-up, I believe. Somebody asked, does this pricing for Purview data governance apply to extending sensitivity labels to Azure, et cetera?
So sensitivity labels now have their own pricing. So sensitivity labels being applied to non-M365 assets are a separate pricing model, and that can be found, on the pricing page for that, and an explanation of how those work.
Thank you. Okay, I have another pre-submitted question. Back to the Maxime show, data security. I have multiple email addresses that are used for workflows and automation. Can I set a sensitivity rule that forces all emails to those set addresses to have a default sensitivity label that is not encrypted?
We can. So there might be two ways, depending on the approach here. We need to dig a little bit deeper on the questions, but so first of all, you can publish labels just to specific sets of users, so that might be applicable in this context. But if it's an enforcement methodology, then we can look at exchange transport rule if this is only for email labeling it in this context. So depending on where you want to apply this, you might have both. But just for emails, transport rules could be set for looking at this, looking at the sender, applying a targeted RMS template or label to those recipients. So there are two methods depending on our approach. I would generally recommend and the label defines whether it's encrypted or not. I would although advise to take a look at the Secure by Default paper that we published last year to help you reach scale on protection labels and or leveraging protection, which is and there are different kinds of protection we can apply, whether that's encryption or through other means with insider risk and DLP. So two-part answer, do advise on looking on Secure by Default just to give you some additional directions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So next question is compliance. So we have Peter on deck, right? Okay.
Yep.
You ready? All right. So what are the differences between standard and unified auditing?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say, actually, let me think a little bit. I would say the key differences. So first of all, these are the two levels that we have today inside of auditing within M365 Purview Audit. To call them out again, standard auditing and unified auditing, which means that you're using the audit premium SKU. Comparing those two would be in tabular form, right? So I can share that with the team later and they can share it out to you. But there are a couple of things that you need to keep an eye on. One is log retention. You'd have in standard auditing 90 days. In unified auditing, you'd have, so that's audit premium, you'd have 1 year that can be extended to 10 years, which is a new thing that we've introduced with retention policies. There will be differences in your capabilities around search, right? So for standard auditing, you'll have basic search filters. For unified auditing, you'll have advanced search filters. So you can filter by sensitive data types, specific activities, risk signaling. There will be differences in the audit log access mechanism. So for standard auditing, you'd have admin access via Microsoft Purview compliance portal. And in the unified auditing, you'll have longer data retention and API access for SIEM integration, say, for example. There will be differences in event capturing. So for standard auditing, you'll have basic activity logs like emails read, file access. For unified auditing, you'll have more granular logging like mail items accessed, detailed file modifications, that sort of thing. There will be differences in the insights that you gain for investigations. For standard auditing, again, you'll have basic insights, so user logins, file access, emails that were sent over exchange, and things like this. For the unified auditing piece, you'll have more granular logging. More granular auditing. Tracks who accessed emails, who accessed files, whether data was exfiltrated. And then there will be some differences in your use cases, right? So for standard auditing, you'll have general security monitoring and compliance, whereas for unified auditing, you'll have advanced forensics, you'll have the insider risk investigations at your disposal, and you'll have compliance in regulated industries. And then there are a couple other minor ones, but these should be the big components and the big differences. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Peter. So I have some more. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I have some more questions that were pre-submitted that didn't make it to our slideshow, so I can pull those. But in the meantime, Maxime, Kevin, and Peter, if you see anything in the chat that you are able to answer live, that would be great as I work on pulling up our other pre-submitted questions.
Yeah, I'll pick up. Maybe there's a few follow-up questions about the pricing model, the pay-as-you-go pricing model. So I'll sort of sum up a few of these together. The data security versus data governance pay-as-you-go model, and I did share the link somewhere in one of these questions. I'll share back in chat. Does describe the model where it is for protected asset versus governed asset. They're different meters or different sets of capability. Think of it as it's a value-based approach on what you're governing and or what you're securing. So the protected assets, it's about auto labeling and protection policies. So think of it as in MIP today. For Fabric, it will be through the mix of configuration of labeling as well, but also DLP and other protection means that are available. Protected assets are counted once. So if you're both auto labeling and protecting the asset, there's one counter for that. The data governance value proposition is separate. So that would be a separate meter, if I could put it this way. For inside risk management, it is a processing unit. So think of it as the amount of data you're ingesting from third-party, non-M365 data that you're consuming audits and bringing it into the system. It's a processing unit charge, so completely separate as well. Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on this.
No, you covered exactly what I would have said. They are different value propositions. So you get value out of governing your assets within Purview Data Governance, so that your users can search curated data products and see what assets are associated with those data products, such as if it's an application and you have 15 different assets that are underlying that application, then your business users can go to the data product search and search on the details of that application instead of having to search for the assets directly. Previously you'd have to search for each individual asset assuming that you know all the assets you needed. Now you can search, rich curated data products, and then in that data product, you can see exactly what assets are connected to it. That is the data governance, value prop there. And that's how you get your governed assets. For security, they are securing those assets, which is a very different process. It's a different value proposition. And so you may not be securing every different asset that is a governed asset. In fact, it's very likely that you will not necessarily, protect every single governed asset with Purview security. So that is the reason why they are separate.
Great. I could also read off some of the questions that were unanswered. So one of the questions we got was, what's the best practice when looking to do insider risk exclusions? Is it detection groups and indicator variants or global exclusions? It's difficult to understand the difference in use case.
For that one, so don't have a straight or single answer to, it will depend on the scenario. So if you could please reach out to us, we'll make sure that you have, and if you're in our CCP community, you can also ask a question there. We'll have a deeper look at it. Generally speaking, I'd say it's more about the rule in the policy that you're configuring it. That would be sort of a default answer, but it really depends on the situation.
Okay.
Not a single answer.
Thank you. The next one we have is, some people block Copilot from accessing specific SPO sites and disable search for the site. Does this affect DLP because of the crawler?
And I know there's two methods of doing this. So I believe there is one. So if search is not available, it can affect. It does affect other things too, by the way, for collaboration. So I would not recommend removing search altogether. I mean, it's a good quick stopgap to address this, but we have additional methods to address oversharing. So my recommendation would be more to look at the oversharing oversharing for Copilot blueprint that we've released last year at around Ignite, just to get all the methods available to you. That won't impact collaboration the same way.
Great, thank you. The next one we have is, with the introduction of M365 Copilot, how can security admins use Purview to ensure compliance and track where users access data to ensure there was no unauthorized access?
Yes, leveraging DSPM for AI would be the short and quick answer here. So do take a look at this. So I take a look from compliance from both sides. If you're looking at purely oversharing and protection, that's the previous answer we gave. If you're looking at complaints on how they're using Gen AI, and whether it's Copilot or other Gen AI, then leverage DSPM for AI to identify where you have a risky behavior and it's going to propose you policies to address those risks.
Great, thanks.
I'll just pile on that, because specifically inside of CC, communication compliance, there's also the ability to use that to enhance compliance within M365 Security Copilot by monitoring and analyzing user interactions to detect potential risks, such as sharing sensitive information or engaging in inappropriate behavior. Some of the key features that we offer there in CC are monitoring the Copilot interactions that occur between a user and the tech. So CC can actually analyze prompts and responses in M365 Copilot applications to identify potential compliance issues. You can enforce policies. So organizations that you work in can set up policies to detect specific keywords, sensitive information types, patterns indicative of risky behavior within Copilot interactions. And there's a broad set of risk mitigation approaches and strategies that you can use, chiefly by identifying and addressing potential compliance violations in Copilot usage. That includes ethical stuff, that includes information protection, intellectual property and prompt shield, so manipulation of prompts that are input. And across all of these, CC helps to maintain organizational standards and regulatory compliance when interacting with Copilot. And by the way, this not only applies to Copilot, but we also do third-party Gen AIs I won't name any now, but think of the big guys out there. We also support them too. So by integrating communication compliance with Security Copilot, organizations can proactively manage and mitigate risks associated with AI-assisted communications, ensuring secure and compliant environment, not only with Copilot.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, can Purview detect classification labels of Excel files embedded in PowerPoint? If yes, is it possible to check only labels on a main file?
It's a good question. I don't remember for embedded files, so I'll find back the question in chat and provide the answer a little bit later. The labeling, though, will be, so validation, if you have a DLP policy on labels, it will be on the main file. Now, the question after that would be if for inheritance to consider. So let me double check about embedded files fully and then provide additional answer. But labeling policy will be on the main file.
Great, thank you. The next question is there a way to check if a device has received the last version of a policy before this is shown in the Purview portal?
Yes. I'll find the link to the article to it. So we have a troubleshooting guide that it will give you the name of the tool. So there's a display DLP policy, or if you run MD Client Analyzer, you can also see when it was last synchronized. So yes, there are tools that can be run on the device to do this. Now, maybe just for clarity as well, because I've seen a couple questions, think of it as it takes roughly 10 minutes to update the cloud, the policy in the cloud, and then up to 5 minutes after that, because the device is polling every 5 minutes. Now, so that's a 15-minute window that in general, we should be synchronizing. The portal, and therefore the question here is the policy sync portal only updates roughly every 2 hours. And that's where we have the gap of knowing and why this question is relevant, but there are tools to run on the device to know if it's being leveraged. There's there is an article today that exists, but we're going to be in the deployment guide we're releasing. We talk about high intensity testing that covers this section specifically.
Great, thanks. The next one.
Sorry, if I could just pile on top of that, there was another question that I think might be co-relevant to that. And if I was going to read it, is it possible to force a policy sync in case you have an urgent need to change policy behavior? And maybe that ties into that a little bit. Maxime, what do you think?
And I provided a chat response to it, but at the high level, what I like about that conversation is knowing that it's within 15 minutes often changes the how often relevant that question is, because there was a lot of misconception about it takes an hour to 2 hours to get the policy, but knowing that it takes less than 15 minutes, what are the next options? So when I talk about exception customers, I tend to recommend, first of all, block with override is an option here, so that at least it's in the UX, they can continue. We do have break glass recommendation that we can provide, so there are ways to craft policies so that they can call support and say, hey, it's not working, I need to send this right now. What's the method? And there's a method that we can recommend here. However, if we take the time it takes to do this, right, so there's the time to call support, verification, you're only saving roughly less than 15 minutes. So do verify whether it's a change of policy that's necessary versus just a break glass. And those are two options.
That's a great response. I was also thinking, just whilst you were talking, that it could be possible with some dependencies. For example, with devices that have been successfully managed by Defender for Endpoint, it might be possible to log into the Purview compliance portal, navigate to settings, device onboarding, devices, filter to locate the devices with the policy sync status of not updated or not available, and to see if you can click on the policy sync button. But then there will be a dependency on using Defender for Endpoint in that particular scenario. So sometimes you might be able to do that depending on the other components that you're using within M365, like Defender for Endpoint.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, how can we have a sensitivity label override SharePoint external sharing restriction? Is it possible to have a specific group of users that can change sensitivity labels for files?
There's a few, it depends in this question. So The first method I talk about is more about the top-down or intelligent defaults, something we've been using. It's shared secure by default. So the first method is overwriting will happen only if, and we'll talk about the methods, but overwriting will only happen if the file has not been manually labeled. And if the label you're trying to apply automatically through some means, whether it's defaults or auto label, if the label is a higher priority. So that's the how. So then you have options of client-side auto labeling, which will be based on sensitivity of content classification. You can have server-side auto labeling, which can be also for this, but also with contextual condition. Think of it as this is my new labeling scheme. All these files in SharePoint should have been labeled confidential. All employees run a server-side auto labeling policy that says all docx, PPTX, XLSX, and PDF, label them to this on those sites. That would be a great method to automatically apply. But the primary sort of restriction here would be if the file has been manually labeled. Today, we don't offer a mean to relabel automatically on top of manual labels.
Great, thank you. The next question is, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Jason, I just saw one that we might have missed in the pre-submitted questions. Maybe we didn't pick it up because it seemed very broad. But it says how to ensure compliance across the board. And I just wanted to provide a short and comprehensive answer to that and not just skip it entirely. So using M365 Purview for compliance, you would think about a number of different components inside the stack and not only inside the compliance component that pillars that we have inside of Purview. So to ensure compliance in M365 with Purview, you could think about data protection, so applying sensitivity labels and DLP to prevent data leaks. You would think about risk management, employing insider risk management and communication compliance to detect threats proactively, based on behavior and communication ethics. You would look at regulatory compliance, so applying or employing compliance manager to track regulations like GDPR, CIS, ISO 27001. You could employ auditing and e-discovery to monitor, investigate, and retain records for litigation and other scenarios. And you could use information governance to automate data retention and lifecycle management. I believe we do have a visual guide. So if you're interested in that, it's something we're happy to share too. So I hope that addresses maybe that more broad question.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, Purview policies are written in KQL query format. Is there any other language that's required to write the policies in Purview?
Actually, I think it's a broad question. Depending on which policy they're talking about, typically I leverage KQL mostly from an AED standpoint. So I'm not sure what the question is specifically for. If we can get more details in chat.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll move on. The next one is in data lifecycle management, creating retention policies for SharePoint Classic and communication sites. Is there a way to exclude by user rather than by SharePoint URLs? Say I wanted to exclude user XYZ from a 10-year deletion policy across all my SharePoint sites.
Peter?
Sorry, I had audio drop out there shortly. Would you repeat that? Is that a live question?
Yes, it's a live question. I'll repeat it. In data lifecycle management, creating retention policies for SharePoint Classic and communication sites. Is there a way to exclude by user rather than by SharePoint URLs? Say I wanted to exclude user XYZ from a 10-year deletion policy across all my SharePoint sites.
Could you just say the last part again? Is there a way to exclude user instead of?
Exclude by user rather than by SharePoint URLs.
That's a good question. I don't actually have an answer right now. I would like to provide a little bit more to a contextual question because I don't really understand the semantics, but generally, yes. So in data lifecycle management, you can exclude specific users, of course, not just SharePoint URLs, right? You could look at configuring exclusions for various locations. I think that's one option that you could explore. Switching on my camera here, sorry. Try Exchange mailboxes, so excluding specific users. I think that's something that we've talked about. OneDrive accounts could be another one, so exclude specific users. So for OneDrive, you can also exclude specific users by selecting the Choose Users option and specifying the users to exclude. For SharePoint sites, you could exclude specific sites. You go to choose a site and specify the sites to exclude. And for M365 groups, you could do something similar, so exclude specific groups. Important considerations more broadly here would be look at the policy scope and ensure that your retention policies are set to let me choose specific locations, right? Instead of only users, perhaps. Think about your policy limits, be aware of the limits of retention policies, such as the max number of inclusions or exclusions per policy. That will also influence this a little bit. And also take a look at your policy hierarchy. So if multiple retention policies apply to the same content, usually the most restrictive policy will be, will take precedence. So that's something to also keep in mind. Yeah, if that doesn't completely answer your question, please reach out to us directly again, and I'll go do a little bit more research on how we can help you with that using Purview.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, do you recommend utilizing DSPM or DLP in audit mode to gather an initial understanding of data within your environment in which to build policy and governance off of?
That'd be a short answer. Yes.
Okay. Great. The next one we have is it possible to integrate sensitivity labels with Defender XDR in the same way that Purview Insider Risk Management does?
I'm curious about the XDR angle of the question. I would like to get more details about the XDR piece. So generally speaking, if the question is about the audit events and knowing when people are changing, because if I think of XDR, it's about looking at how people are behaving. So the first go-to is the audits today about when someone is changing a label, because that's really the event you could look for. What I would recommend in context that we would have XDR integration is leveraging insider risk management to look at the behaviors of people changing label or downgrading a label, maybe obfuscating and exfiltrating the file, and raising alerts with insider risk management, which is integrated with XDR.
Great. The next one we have is there an easy way to integrate the output of Compliance Manager to to other GRC tools for the assessment and control status?
Peter?
Yeah, can you just repeat the question? The audio was breaking up a little bit.
Sure. Is there an easy way to integrate the output of Compliance Manager to other GRC tools for the assessment and control status?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to get back to you guys on that one. So I'll take that away.
No worries. The next one we have is there a way to audit the events if we provide exception to the users in DLP?
So, sorry, repeat the question. Override the permission.
Is there a way to audit the events if we provide exception to the users in DLP?
It depends what definition of exception we have in context. If it is a block with override and then a user manages their own exception, then that's going to be, in the alert details, you're going to see that it's an override. So you can determine that from there. You can also see the justification that they've put in. So there are ways to report on that. If you're talking about a user that's been excluded from some policies and you want to know more, then you would need to have, my recommendation for this one is maybe having them as an audit alert rule instead to be able to audit on them. So it really depends on how exemptions are managed, but those would be the two quick methods.
Okay, great.
And but I'm going to also use a comment, just generalize some of the things I see in incident management, because and that's something we're working on in the deployment guide for DLP, is the strategy you should adopt, or at least think about adopting for when defining policies. Because I see a lot of organizations purely looking from a regulatory requirement, which is necessary, but don't think about how they want to manage alerts. So if we flip that into, I want to filter out for whatever conditions, could be departments, could be some users. Think about the policies you want to create that you're only auditing, and then the policies that you really want to have some level of enforce or block with override, and then leverage insider risk management on top of all this to really quickly identify the bad behaviors instead of traditional DLP only approach of looking at every activity. So that, I'm sort of generalizing the question here, but I see a fair bit of challenge for that.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, how does Microsoft see their MSSP partners implementing a managed purview?
That's a bit of a loaded question. I think and across the board, and I'll look at my peers if they have additional opinions from compliance and governance. I do see it for data security. Management comes in two flavors. It will come into managing policies or the administrative aspect of it. But in security, I also see the managed SOC component of Purview, especially for data security, where they're looking for people to help them not only craft the policies, but also know how to operate under them. So I see a little bit of both. Feel free to ask any sub-level questions about this, but we do see both.
Great, thank you. The next one is more of a situational question. So it goes, after changing a DLP rule to look at externally sharing of a SIT, the Activity Explorer shows the user and app at SharePoint both triggered the rule for a doc in SharePoint in the middle of the night when the use was not doing any work. Why would this happen?
So what's interesting about SharePoint OneDrive in comparison, and often this is compared to CASB solution, which are looking at when a file is accessed by an external user. The difference with SharePoint DLP is this is happening at the source. So any reasons that the file could be touched, it could be some automation, it could be a Power Automate workflow, it could be indexing that's happening on the file. Every time the file is essentially classified, we're evaluating it against conditions. So access is one of those, but the other ones could be like anything else touching the file. Very key here related to SharePoint OneDrive, because I do get a lot of questions about that behavior specifically, because when the file is indeed touched, and think about it, the difference in SharePoint is the file could be shared at the file level, folder, library, site, and it could have been shared before it was sensitive. It could have been shared after it is sensitive. That's why we're constantly evaluating when the file is touched. So therefore, some process of some type, and again, could have been a backend process for indexing, would have touched that file during the night and then triggered a DLP alert. The reason for the trigger, the conditions will be the file is shared and the file contains sits. So what those two conditions are met regardless someone is accessing it right now.
Great, thank you. We have another situational question. It goes, I have created an endpoint DLP to block uploads to cloud storage location, e.g. Google Drive. The policy is synced to the devices and the device is onboarded, but policy is not enforced or detect. Also, block copy to USB is not working. The customer has Zscaler SSE. Would Zscaler interfere with endpoint DLP, or is there another issue?
Could be. Hard to say. It is definitely situational. I would split the two questions. There would be different reasons for the upload to cloud versus copy to USB. So if I take upload to cloud, that's where Zscaler could have an effect. But I've seen also a lot of misconfiguration about the sensitive service domain groups and sensitive domains. There's a lot of sub-configs with this, so I get why this can be confusing. We would have to, I would recommend opening up a support case just to evaluate the policy configuration and looking at the mix of sensitive service domains and sensitive service domain groups. Like just a quick heads up on this one, when you go in the endpoint DLP settings and you select the allow or block in the dropdown, think of it as you're managing, if you select allow, you're managing an allow list, so everything is blocked except these, and vice versa if you select block. That's one of the common misconception. And then it's about the granularity in a rule if you're using sensitive service domain groups. Recommend support cases for this one. Copy to USB would be a different reason. It depends on if you're looking at files that are saved on the device that is evaluated and then copied to USB, that should be blocked. So it might be a test or a gap, but we're augmenting the capabilities about related to copy to USB. So we'll have more scenarios supported for this one coming up soon. But yeah, I would advise support cases just to review the specifics.
Great, thank you. We've got another situational one here. It goes, I'm hoping to set up an API to export Activity Explorer data for DLP and information protection. Our next step is to determine if the backend of DLP and information protection is Purview or M365. Is the backend for these two modules M365?
It's an odd way of asking a question. I'm curious a little bit about the why. Again, if a person can add details, but essentially audits activities are coming from compliance port, what used to be called compliance, but a compliance system. It is part of the same tenant construct that you have with M365, but it's not sort of what consumer would think as M365, which tends to be Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are there ways to set up account permissions to see reports which only have files that have classified data, not the data itself, i.e. PII found in file XYZ?
So to some extent, yes. There are two. So if you look at the role groups, and you probably recommend having custom role groups at this point, but the roles inside of those between investigators and analysts, if you look at the short answer is yes, there are ways to do this. You can see where with someone's permission, if you remove access to data classification content viewer, for example, so not having this permission, we'll give you like the hits, we'll get you a number. Hey, you've had X amount of sensitive information, but you're not going to see which one. So you're going to see credit card, but you're not going to know the credit card number. And you're not going to be able to open the file to look at the evidence. So that's one way that typically I get this question from a level 1 to level 2 analyst, SOC analyst, and you can just have people that look at the base information and then triage and then sends it up. Then those would not have, in some cases, would not have this permission. So short answer, yes. You just maybe send a question in CCP and we can provide more details there.
Great. I think we have time for maybe. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Let me pick one, since Maxime is being bombarded with data security. Let me see. There was an interesting one around ChatGPT agents using. So if we develop internal ChatGPT agents using Azure OpenAI service, how can we integrate that with DSPM for AI to gain deep visibility into prompts and responses? I'll try to tackle that. So I think a couple of things you can do is one would be enable logging and monitoring on the Azure OpenAI interface itself. So activate Azure OpenAI diagnostic logs for API requests and responses. Those logs provide detailed insights into operations of your GPT agent. Use Azure Monitoring and Sentinel to track and analyze these logs. And then you can apply DSPM for AI, obviously. So deploy DSPM to monitor for data exposure, anomalies, obviously policy violations. That would be a big one. Continuously assess your data flows, access permissions, and security posture overall. Then take a look at your compliance enforcement and security controls around that too. So, DLP policies will be important to prevent sensitive data leaks from that agent. Set your role-based access controls appropriately, and encryption for AI data governance would be another one. And then maybe take a look at automating your AI risk detection and remediation workflows and see if you can continually scan for misconfigurations, compliance gaps, and data governance risks. That would be my suggestion to approach that. But if you need a little bit more, just reach out to us. We'll see if we can get you more infos.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions. So with that, I will thank Maxime, Kevin, Sandeep, and Peter for being our guests and for sharing the great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/security community. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.